The storm swallowed the woods whole when 3 heavy knocks rattled Noah Granger's cabin door. Thunder cracked overhead, and through the roar came a boy's broken scream. "Can you hide my mum for one night?" Those 4 words, "hide my mum," cut through Noah like a siren, dragging him back to nights on the line when one wrong choice could bury an entire squad. But this time, it wasn't an enemy with a rifle outside. It was 2 shaking figures in the rain, carrying a secret strong enough to drown a whole town. The question hung in the dark. Did he dare open the door, or was that door the spark to a nightmare crueler than any war? Rain was lashing the old wood walls, the kind of hard, sideways rain that sounds like it wants to strip a place bare. Wind shoved through every crack in the doorframe, dragging with it the sharp rattle of a tin roof that might give at any minute. The oil lamp on the table shivered, its weak yellow light barely holding on, sliding across scratched wood. Noah Granger sat there, back straight the way a soldier's always is, eyes moving across a watch log he wasn't really reading anymore. Outside, the night had swallowed everything, nothing left but the sound of the storm. And then, thud, thud, thud. 3 knocks on the door, heavy, sharp, like a summons you don't ignore. Noah was on his feet before he even thought about it. Old instincts. He grabbed his coat, hand brushing the grip of the Glock tucked behind the chair. The fire in the stove was still burning strong. Cabin was small, 1 door in and out. He flicked off the porch light with the switch by the frame, pulled the rough curtain just enough to press an eye to the glass. A boy stood under the awning, soaked through, arms wrapped around an old tin box, cheeks raw from the cold, lips shaking. Beside him, a woman, his mother, had to be hunched over, clothes muddy, eyes wide and wild from fear and exhaustion. Both her hands clamped down on the boy's shoulders, like if she let go, the storm itself would snatch him away. Noah didn't open. He dropped the curtain back, took 2 steps away, then circled to the door, flashlight in his hand now. He clicked it on, a hard, narrow beam cutting through the crack. The door creaked open just wide enough for a hand. Wind knifed in, carrying the wet dirt smell of the woods. "Mr. The boy's voice came shaky but steady. "Can you hide my mom for one night?" Noah said nothing, just clicked the beam once, the light pinning the boy's face. Wide black eyes stared back at him, burning with something more than fear. The woman raised her head, her voice torn and hoarse. "We got nowhere else. Just one night, please." Noah studied her. Hair plastered to her skull, skin pale as chalk, eyes sharp in a way that wasn't just fear, it was watchful, almost like she'd been trained to keep her guard. "What's your name?" "Lena." "The boy?" "Milo." He looked them both over, light sweeping down to their boots, mud caked on thick. "Anybody else out there with you?" Her head shook too fast to be clean truth. "Number, nobody." Noah's jaw tightened. Kid shouted like he was running from someone. Silence. Wind shoved hard enough to make the roof groan like torn sheet metal. Lena swallowed. "Someone's after us, but not cops." Noah locked his eyes on hers. A man who's lived combat knows the difference between a lie and somebody hanging on by a thread. He didn't see a scam in her, but he didn't see enough to believe either. 10 seconds of silence. The wind rose again. Milo's body shook, lips pressed tight to stop the tears. Noah pulled a deep breath, slow and long. Then he swung the door open halfway and stepped back without a word. She didn't hesitate. Guided the boy inside, her head turning like a rookie soldier walking into a new outpost. Door shut. Bolt slid home. It felt like cutting the outside world in half. The fire burned hot. Heat spilled out, enough that Milo's shoulders loosened, enough that Lena exhaled like she'd just staggered out of a grave. Noah tossed each of them a dry towel from the chair. He didn't ask questions. Didn't say another word. Just sat back down, eyes flicking up to the clock on the wall, close to midnight. Her voice trembled. "I know you don't believe me. Nobody ever does." Noah's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Doesn't matter if I believe you. I just don't want to wake up tomorrow and see my name in the paper." Her eyes dropped. Milo fiddled with the tin box, cracked it open a hair, then snapped it shut quick. Noah caught a glimpse of something wrapped in cloth. Couldn't tell what. Wind slammed the roof again. The fire spit sparks. Noah stood, flashlight in hand, opened the front door again. Not because he trusted them, just habit. Always check after strangers cross your line. He swept the beam across the porch, out into the muddy yard, empty, until his light dropped lower. There, in the puddle where rainwater pooled, was a single footprint. Big, clear, coming from the tree line, not the road. Not Lena's, not Milo's. And sure as hell, not his. Noah slid the bolt shut, the sharp clack of metal carrying through the small cabin. The stove fire was still burning, its glow flickering across the low ceiling like an uneven heartbeat, warm, but uneasy. With 2 strangers inside, the room suddenly felt too small. Nobody spoke, nobody had to. Whatever words had been spent out on the porch meant nothing now, not after that 3rd footprint showed up in the mud. Lena perched at the very edge of the bench against the wall, Clutching the old towel Noah had tossed her, eyes fixed on her boy huddled close to the fire. Milo didn't cry, didn't complain about the cold. He just clamped both hands around that battered tin box like it was a living organ he couldn't afford to lose. Noah didn't ask. He didn't move closer. He went back to his chair across from the fire, hung his coat on the hook, pulled a chipped enamel mug from the shelf, and poured hot water from the kettle he kept ready. The motions were clean, exact, quiet. Only the soft hiss of the kettle filled the air, tying the three of them to the same rhythm. He sipped once, eyes drifting past Lena's shoulder to the reflection in the glass behind her. Nothing moved out there. Still, he knew better. Something had been out there tonight. And chances were, it hadn't left. The silence grew so thick you could hear the wood shifting in the walls. Lena sat still enough to seem like she wasn't just a guest waiting out the storm, but a woman bracing to keep her whole life from cracking apart. She didn't shake out her hair, didn't stretch her legs, just pulled a small cloth from her pocket and dabbed the rain off Milo's cheeks. The boy never looked up, only pressed his thumb into the side of that tin box, his eyes locked on the flames. Noah noticed. The way the kid held that box, it wasn't fear of someone stealing it. It was weight. Like the box held a secret so tied to him that if he let it go, he wouldn't be himself anymore. The stove snapped as a heavy log split under the heat. Lena flinched, throwing a hand over her son's chest. Noah didn't even blink. Years had taught him to sort sounds. Some meant trouble. Some were just the world turning. The air between them stopped feeling like strangers sharing a roof. It started to feel like a standoff. Who was hiding what? Who was testing trust? Who was waiting for the other to slip? Noah poured another mug, set it down on the table in front of her. She gave a small nod, said nothing. Milo glanced once at the drink, then turned back to the fire. That's when an old picture cut into Noah's mind. Kandahar, a winter night. A family had walked up to the wire, shivering, begging for a night near the heat. They hadn't asked for food, just a fire. The child had clutched a tin can too, only it was tea powder inside. Hours later, the blast tore the checkpoint apart. The stove went sky high, the kid blown apart with it. His father had planted a device under the can. Noah had never forgotten the sight under the searchlight, those small fingers still locked around the lid. His hand tightened on the mug now, his gaze sliding back to Milo. Number. He couldn't damn a boy for a memory, but he couldn't shake the truth either. Survival starts with suspicion. The wind clawed the glass, rattling it in the frame. Milo shrank back. Lena wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time, her body softened a little. And that's when Noah caught at her eyes. Not panic anymore, not even fear. It was the look of someone trained to stay alert. A woman who hadn't just stumbled into danger, but had lived in it long enough to know the rules. Noah finally spoke, his voice low. No one followed you here. She shook her head, eyes slipping away. We cut through the woods. No one. When the boy knocked, you stood right at his shoulder, but the prints outside don't match. There were others. Her eyes lifted, steady now. Her voice came even, no rush. If I say I don't know, you won't believe me. If I say I do but can't tell, you'll throw us out. Isn't that right? Noah didn't answer, just stared into the fire, jaw tight as a pulled wire. Milo coughed, and Lena's hand was there at once, rubbing his back. The wind shoved the walls again. The hook on the door groaned under the strain. No one moved. Noah leaned, rolling his shoulder joint old reflex before action. But after a few beats, it was only rain hammering the roof. Nothing else. Time stretched thin, like a thread barely holding. No words. Milo drifted into sleep. Lena drew the thin blanket over him, but her eyes stayed open. Noah didn't close his either. He kept them on the window frame, the fire throwing their long, warped shadows against the wood walls. By dawn the rain had eased, but the sky stayed low and heavy, grey as old steel. Noah opened the door. The damp air slapped cold against his face, his back still warm from the stove. He stepped to the porch, then froze. Right there, on the boards outside the door, lay a black envelope, laid square, untouched by rain, new. Someone had put it there after the storm had passed. He bent, picked it up, tore it open. Inside was a printed photo shot from high angle, through the kitchen window. The image showed him, Lena and Milo, the three of them, sitting around the fire, the glow on their faces, clear enough you could count the lines at the corners of his eyes. Someone had been outside that night, camera pressed to the glass. Tucked with the photo was a slip of paper. 2 words, bold, in black ink, keep silent. Noah held the photo in his hand a long time, eyes locked on it, thumb sliding along the edge like he might feel fresh ink if it were there. But there was no smell, no tack. The print was dry, the back blank, no note, no mark. Just that slip of paper with the bold words, keep silent. Not the kind of threat kids scrawl when they're scared. This had the weight of a command, the kind that came from someone used to being obeyed. Someone who knew this cabin sat too far from town, no neighbors close, and its owner was an old soldier cut off from everyone. Noah slid the door bolt back in place, tucked the photo and paper into the drawer under the stove. His hand lingered before closing it. Then he set the Glock on top. Not to hide it, but to remind himself. Someone had crossed his line, and he hadn't invited them. By midday the rain had passed, but the sky stayed grey. The ground was still soft, mud sucking at every step. Tire tracks pressed deep into the dirt road that ran out to the highway. Noah pulled on his hat, shrugged into his coat, and stepped outside without a word. Lena watched him through the doorway, said nothing. Her hand rested on Milo's shoulder, the boy still planted by the fire. Noah worked around the cabin slow, eyes scanning the ground. At the side of the place, he stopped where the boards were wetter than the rest. In the muck and leaves lay a footprint sunk deep, big, long, heavy tread like boots worn by men who worked mines or mills. He planted his own boot alongside. Shorter, narrower, different. And the thing that made him pause wasn't the size, but the direction. The print didn't lead back toward the road. It circled the cabin, toward the kitchen window. Under the window, the moss was crushed. In the mess sat the end of a cigarette, rolled by hand, thin white paper rimmed with pale gold. The tip carried a faint smudge lipstick maybe, or machine grease. He brought it to his nose, still carried a scent, still warm, couldn't be more than 12 hours old. His eyes lifted toward the tree line. No sound, but the gut of a man who'd spent more nights in ambush than in sleep told him someone had stood there a long time, watching while the three of them thought the fire meant safety. He went back inside, stripped off his coat, hung it, walked straight into the kitchen sink and washed his hands. Milo was folding the towel by the stove into neat squares, keeping his fingers busy. Lena stayed at the door, watching Noah like she was trying to read a page she couldn't turn. He didn't look at her, didn't ask, he didn't need to. The air inside had shifted. She knew it. She knew he'd found something, and she knew that meant their time tucked away here was running thin. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a darker grey. From far off came the sound of an engine, steady, heavy, not in a rush. Noah stepped out onto the porch. A black pickup, newer model, sat high on its frame, white LED lights cutting sharp through the dim. It rolled slow down the main road, slow enough for the driver to look into every house strung along the tree line. Noah stood straight, didn't duck back, didn't step down. He let them see him, and he saw them, the pale, cold face behind the glass. Graham Ricks. The truck slid past. No dust, no music, nothing but its presence, clear as if to say, I know where you are. Noah stayed where he was, staring down the road a long while before turning back. Lena still stood in the doorway. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. She understood. Dark finally fell. The cabin lit up again. Lena fixed what little she could for Milo dry bread and milk. Noah sat across, sipping old coffee from his tin cup. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It wasn't polite. It was waiting. And then, when Milo finished his last bite, he set the tin box on his lap, held it there a long time before opening it. Not like he wanted to show off, more like he couldn't keep it hidden anymore. Inside was cloth, folded tight, stained with grey dust, bits of grit, and the smell of smoke. Noah leaned forward, not too close. Lena didn't move, hands fixed on her knees, eyes wide open. Milo unwrapped it. Inside was a silver USB drive, scratched, caked with mine dirt. One side wrapped in black tape gone dull with grime. Noah said nothing. The boy lowered his head, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if it's dangerous, but Mom said we have to keep it. The air thinned, like someone had sucked the oxygen out. Nobody breathed deep. The fire still burned, but the glow seemed lower, like it had sunk. Noah straightened, his mind running through a dozen possibilities. The drive didn't have to be about files. Could be a tracker, could be malware, could be bait. But the soldier in him shoved all that noise aside. What cut through was the boy's voice shaking, but still holding to his mother's words. And what burned even clearer was Lena's eyes. Not fear anymore. Acceptance. She knew once the USB was out, everything would shift, and she'd already made peace with it. Noah rose slow, stepped forward, held out a hand. Milo gave it up with both palms, like passing over a piece of himself. Noah turned it, studied the tape, peeled back a strip. There, written in ballpoint, one word, purged. Not a code, a statement. Somebody inside the system had been cut out, and they'd left behind proof for whoever came next. Noah didn't open the laptop right away. He left the USB sitting on the wooden table, next to his cold coffee. Lena didn't press him. She just led Milo to the corner bed, pulled the thin blanket straight. The boy fell asleep fast, without a stir, like he knew this was his one chance to rest. Noah pulled open a drawer and dragged out the old laptop he used for work notes and hunting maps. Screen cracked at one corner, a few keys worn clean, but the thing still ran. He slid the USB in. No firewalls, no tricks. One folder popped up, no name. Inside, 5 files, 4 PDFs, 1 WAV audio file. Noah didn't rush. He read each name slow, then opened the first. It was a technical report, 20-some pages long, stamped and signed by Eagle Ridge Mining. The middle note read, all support beams in sub-level 3 have been certified as safe. No collapse risk detected. But in the margins were clumsy edits, fonts didn't match, lines spacing off, odd bold text that didn't belong. He opened the second file, a repair report. Itemized cost cuts. One line stood out. Replace A-grade steel beams with B. 2 grade saves budget per internal proposal. No signature, no seal. The third file was a scan of the shift log. It listed a meeting with someone identified only as GR. The time matched the date on the technical report. In the margin, scratched in black ink, "No one outside can know the beams were swapped." Noah stopped cold. GR didn't need spelling out. He'd seen the man yesterday, behind the glass of that black truck rolling slow past his cabin. Graham Ricks, owner of Eagle Ridge. Noah leaned back, breathed deep, then clicked the last file. The recording. A faint hiss, then a man's voice, low, firm, no attempt to hide. The kind of voice used to giving orders. "Beams hold fine. Engineers always overshoot. Just stick to the cut list. Sub-level 3 won't matter. If it caves, it's just the storage bay. Nobody dies." Another voice broke in. "But the report." "Forget the report. Do it. That's 400 grand saved this quarter. That's enough." Noah stopped the playback before the third man spoke. He didn't need more. That was enough to see it clear. This wasn't an accident. It was planned. A collapse, dressed up as technical failure. A disaster born from greed. And this USB, it was an indictment. He sat still, staring at the crack across the laptop screen. His mind drifted back to a night, years ago at an eastern base. A storage bunker caved in because one officer wanted the boxes stacked neater. 2 of his men died in that rubble. One was a young medic, Mexican kid, 3 days into the unit. Noah remembered the kid's laugh over coffee, and his last words before watch. "If I die tomorrow, clean me up some before my mom sees me. She can't stand blood." Noah closed the laptop slow, set it back on the table. Outside, the night was windless. That was the worst part. Trouble didn't need a storm to move in. He stood, walked out to the porch, not to watch this time, to check. Every latch, every hinge. The hook on the front frame had marks, like someone had pulled it in the dark. He bolted it from inside, then went to the stove drawer, pulled out his Glock and 2 boxes of rounds. When he came back to the kitchen, Lena was awake. Her eyes met his, not surprised. In the weak light, they weren't the eyes of someone begging for shelter anymore. They were the eyes of someone who had already weighed the cost. Noah said nothing. He dragged the chair out, set the pistol on the table beside the USB. His hand tapped it once. "This thing's enough to kill people." Lena nodded. "And enough to keep the boy alive." Noah didn't answer. And that silence was heavier than words. By morning, when he opened the door, another envelope sat on the porch. Not a photo this time. A summons from the sheriff's office. Signed clear. Edward H. Doyle. Charge: harboring a person tied to civil investigation. With a note: report within 48 hours. Noah didn't bother reading it again. He crushed the edge of the paper in his fist, eyes fixed on the line of trees. He knew it now. By tonight, this cabin wasn't a refuge anymore. News moved faster than any winter wind. That morning, when Noah drove down into town to pick up fuel and some dry goods, the newsstand on Main had the papers stacked thick. The headline cut across the front page: "Unstable widow fabricates mine disaster." Beneath it, a grainy shot of Lena leaving a grocery store, head down, hair loose across half her face. The story twisted everything so it looked like she was some broken woman chasing Graham Ricks with lies, hoping for a payout. Noah stood at the stand, finger pressed against the cheap paper, eyes moving slow over the words he'd seen 100 times before. Sources close to the sheriff's office, data not credible, psychological instability following her husband's death. Together, they spelled out a quiet execution branding a woman alone as a liar. Across the street, in the cafe, the chatter had already started. Heads turned toward the old truck parked at the curb. Back at the cabin, he didn't need to hand Lena the paper. She already knew. Each time she passed through the market, whispers trailed behind her. "That's her, poor kid. That man's being played." Milo buried his face, clutching his tin box tighter, walking fast like if he slowed, someone would snatch it away. Noah caught the change in the boy's eyes. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was shame. Heavy, bitter shame no child should ever carry. Noah knew it too well. He'd worn the same look when he came back from the war, walking through his hometown under banners shouting, "Support the fight," knowing how many men hadn't made it home. He knew what it felt like to see truth trampled in public, while the survivor was turned into a punchline. That was harder to swallow than death. Night sank heavy in the cabin. Lena sat beside Milo, brushing his hair until sleep finally took him. Her eyes stared off, dry now but hollow, past crying and past hiding. Noah sat at the table. The USB lay in front of him, the Glock loaded beside it. He knew once the story was bent, the cops and the courts here weren't going to take her side, and sure as hell not his. By dawn, another envelope shoved through the door. This time, not a photo. Inside was a copy of a countersuit from Rick's lawyers, pages heavy with ink. Lena charged with slander, accused of planting fake evidence. Noah's name printed alongside hers, charged with aiding and concealing unlawful activity. The last line made it plain. If they didn't answer, they'd be dragged into court, with Milo's custody at stake. Lena's knees buckled when she read the last paragraph. Noah held the paper, feeling each line like a round chambered, and pointed at his chest. He knew this tactic. You didn't need bullets. You just turned the crowd and the law into weapons, and you ground your enemy down until there was nowhere left to stand. The memory came back sharp. Last time in the field, pinned down in a ruined village, the enemy didn't waste ammo. They fired a few shots an hour, just enough so no one dared lift their head. No food, no sleep, just waiting until the whole unit collapsed. That was the way you killed men with time, and that was the way Graham Rix was coming for him now. Noah knew he couldn't stand this fight alone. He thought of a name he hadn't spoken in years, Ava Sinclair, a lawyer who'd once saved one of his men from a false charge. Tough, not for sale. She'd gone head-to-head with more than one state corporation and walked away standing. That afternoon, Noah drove Lena and Milo into town, past the papers strung in windows, headlines screaming, "Unstable widow," past the stairs. Milo pressed his face into his mother's chest, tin box still clutched like a shield. Lena sat quiet, thin hands trembling, still holding him close. Ava's office sat at the end of Main, beside a dusty bookstore. She welcomed them into a small room that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Mid-50s, grey hair pulled back, sharp eyes behind thin glasses. She didn't waste words. Handed Noah a file thick with documents, copies of the countersuit. Noah flipped pages fast, his name printed line for line with Lena's. The charges didn't stop at concealment, they stretched to obstruction, destruction of evidence. If the case went bad, it wasn't just fines. It could mean jail. And worse, Milo pulled into foster care, stamped, "unsafe environment." Ava didn't need to spell it out. Noah already knew. The USB was a blade with two edges. It could cut Graham Rix open in court, or it could slice Noah and Lena to pieces under the weight of a system Rix controlled. Noah set the file down slowly, like he was lowering a live charge. He drew a breath, staring out the dusty window at the street outside. Life went on, people laughing, buying, selling. No one out there knew his cabin had turned into the center of a dirty war. Lena held her boy, eyes dry but stripped bare. She knew what was coming. She knew she was about to lose him, not to bullets, but to papers and signatures. Milo pressed closer, little hands clamped on that tin box like it was all he had left. Ava flipped to the last page, her voice flat, cutting clear. "They've pulled you directly into the fight. This isn't just Lena's anymore. You're the target now." Noah didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. The eyes of a man who knew there was no more backing down. It was still black outside when Noah shook Lena and Milo awake. The cold river church sat silent, the long pews lost in weak yellow light from a single oil lamp at the back hall. The air smelled of old wood and wax gone sour. The priest had already stepped away, asked no questions, offered no farewell, just laid a hand on Noah's shoulder for a moment, a blessing short and heavy as stone. Noah led the two of them out to the beat-up silver pickup, engine coughing to life like an old soldier's lungs worn down, but still forcing breath. He'd chosen to move before daylight, while fog still blanketed the valley thick as a coat. It was the only cover they had left. The truck rolled forward, tires spitting mud to both sides. In the rear view, Noah caught a flash of headlights. Yellow, steady. A car was trailing. Not fast, not close, but close enough to remind him someone out there had patience. Inside the cab, Lena held Milo tight, arms around both the boy and the tin box he never let go. Milo shut his eyes but didn't sleep, his lips pressed thin, breath quick. The boy knew too well what it meant to be watched. Noah gave him one glance, then locked back on the wheel. He knew this road by heart. Every bend, every rut, every groan of the planks on the old bridge. That bridge across the creek was the test. Straight ahead meant the tail would catch him when daylight hit, but the hunting road, narrow, slick, unmarked, was the only chance. Midway across, Noah killed the headlights. Darkness swallowed them whole, only the rush of water beneath and the pounding in his chest. He let the truck roll off the slope, then cut sharp right, sliding onto the forest track. Leaves crunched under the tires, the truck sliding but holding. Fog closed in thick, white, blinding. He didn't slow. His eyes clung to the markers he knew, an old stump sheared flat, a jagged rock shaped like wolf teeth. He'd driven this road hunting enough times to find it in the dark. Behind, the other engine roared. Headlights swept across the fog, trying to keep pace. They'd seen his turn, but the bend was too sharp, too slick. The gap opened, Noah's grip locked the wheel. His palms were damp, but steady. Each bump tested the frame, tested his nerve. Every second felt like those nights overseas, whole squads, slipping through ravines in black silence. One wrong flash of light, turning them into targets. He said nothing. Didn't need to. Lena understood. She crushed Milo tighter, drawing deep breaths to keep her pulse from breaking loose. After 15 minutes barreling blind through fog, the sound behind them faded. The tail had lost them. Only Noah's engine filled the silence now, mixed with the rough breathing inside the cab. When he was sure, he flicked the lights back on. Weak yellow glow cut through to a track littered with stone and fallen branches. He stopped at a clearing in the woods, creek water trickling nearby, pine pitch heavy in the air. Killed the engine, stepped out, listened. Nothing but bugs and the wind in the trees. He leaned on the truck's side, eyes lifted to fog clinging tight to the canopy. The fight hadn't left him. It just shifted shape. He knew this was the pause before the next hunt. When he climbed back in, Lena was still cradling Milo. The boy had drifted half asleep, the tin box lopsided on his lap, his hand clenched to it all the same. Lena met Noah's eyes across the dark cab. No words. They both knew the hunter wasn't finished. Noah turned the key again, steered the truck down the forest road, until they reached an old shed he'd used in past hunting seasons. That night, they bedded down there, listening to wind push through the loose boards. Sometime near midnight, just as Noah drifted off, his phone buzzed hard in his coat. The screen glared bright. A message. No number. 4 words only. Warehouse K12. Midnight. Alone. Noah sat upright, eyes locked to the glow. No follow-up. No details. Didn't need them. He knew the game. This wasn't bluff. It was a summons. A trap already laid. He clenched the phone, gaze sliding to Lena and Milo, both restless in half sleep. He knew it then. He wasn't just running anymore. He was in the fight, and from here on, every move would drag Milo deeper into danger. The message, Warehouse K12, midnight, alone, still burned on the cracked phone screen when Noah sat frozen in the old shed. Cold from the damp wood crept up the back of his neck, keeping him awake, though it did nothing to ease the tension digging into his gut. Across the room, Lena stirred in her sleep, her body jerking every so often, clutching the boy as if she could anchor him even in dreams. Milo pressed tight against her chest, eyes half open, too awake for a child his age, eyes carrying a weight that should have belonged to a man. Noah knew what it meant. This wasn't just some scare tactic. They were being pushed inch by inch toward a corner they might not crawl out of. He didn't answer the message that night. He let the phone go black and left it on the table, as if ignoring it would slow the noose tightening around them. But he knew better. By morning, he had the truck loaded, Lena and Milo in the back seat, and he pointed the hood toward town. He needed another voice, one that could cut through the noise. Ava Sinclair's office sat small at the end of Main, squeezed between a bookstore and a shuttered shoe repair shop. Her window glass was plastered with old newspaper clippings, most yellowed with time stories of lawsuits against corporations bigger than Graham Ricks could ever dream of. She'd built a reputation as someone who didn't scare easy, didn't bend when the money leaned hard. When Noah pushed the door open, the place smelled of stale coffee and paper ink. Ava was already there, a cup waiting on the desk. She looked at him straight, no ceremony, eyes sharp as if she could see through the bones. She slid a noteboard across the desk. "The USB is your strongest card," she said flat, "but it's also your most dangerous. If you play it now, you lose leverage. I'll hold the original in a safe spot. Meanwhile, we craft a decoy USB bait with a trap file. If Ricks or his men open it, the program feeds them into a fake network. It buys us time, and it leaves us a trail." Noah nodded. He'd fought enough missions to know, sometimes bait mattered more than firepower. That one false step, that single beat of hesitation, could flip the fight. Ava knew the law, but she also knew the law only stretched so far when the battle spilled into the street. They talked until Ava's phone rang. She stepped aside, listening, her face tightening. The voice on the other end was rough, low, trembling, but each word snapped clear. He claimed to be a source close to the mine. He said one man, a foreman, had survived the one on duty the night of the collapse. He hadn't died. He'd gone underground, disappeared, carrying with him the one thing that could break the case open, a shift log, a record written in his hand. When she hung up, the room stayed quiet. Ava set the phone down gentle. "He's alive, somewhere near the north edge of the abandoned pit. He's in hiding. That logbook, if we get it, it nails Ricks shut. The USB proves the swap, the log shows the order. Together, there's no crawling out." Noah didn't need her to finish. He knew the math. If the foreman was found, the story went from rumor to gospel, but going after him meant stepping into ground already rigged. The north rim of Eagle Ridge was Ricks's backyard. He sat back, breathing heavy through his nose. The feeling was old, half hopeless, half electric. The same spark that had kept him alive when everything else said, "Lie down and quit." He had learned long ago. Survival meant knowing when to strike back. This was one of those times. He wouldn't fold. That afternoon, the shed felt heavier than its boards could carry. Lena sat pressed to Milo, trying to steady her hand enough to teach him letters in a small notebook. She was forcing normal into the air, as if routine could keep the world from closing in. But Noah saw the tremor in her fingers, saw the crooked scrawl on the page. Milo wasn't following, his eyes drawn again and again to the window, staring at the tree line like something in the woods was calling him. Noah sat at the table with his maps and his gun laid out. He checked the Glock, then checked again. He traced the routes in and out of the mine grounds, lines he knew by memory but needed to see on paper. He knew they couldn't let the boy slip. But kids weren't built to be caged. Tension pressed them into breaking sooner or later. Dusk sank grey outside. The light bled from the woods until all that was left was shadow. Then came the slam of a door. Hard. Too hard. Noah spun from his chair. Lena's voice ripped raw through the boards. "Milo." End of 4. The boy was already gone, tin box clutched to his chest, his small frame swallowed in the timber. Noah bolted after him, boots digging deep in the wet ground. The cold air cut sharp against his face. His heartbeat was louder than the branches breaking underfoot. In the forest, twigs snapped, birds burst skyward. His voice carried, "Milo," but only silence answered, silence thick enough to choke. It was the battlefield feeling all over again, that split second when one man vanished from formation and you knew you'd spend the next hour tearing the earth apart to find him. Only this time it wasn't a soldier. It was a child. He crashed through a narrow cut in the brush when the ground itself began to hum. A sound too deep to mistake. Heavy, rhythmic. Engines, not trucks. Bigger. The throaty churn of dozers, the grinding growl of machines meant to tear mountains down. The sound of steel teeth clawing stone. It came from the far side of the trees. Getting closer. Noah froze, his ears straining. Beneath the roar of the engines came the clank of metal buckets lowering, scraping rock. A chill spread down his spine. This wasn't just a pursuit. Rix had rolled heavy equipment in. He was turning the forest itself into a job site for a manhunt. Noah's eyes scanned the ground. No boy in sight. Just gouges in the dirt, fresh trails torn up, stretching toward the sound of the machines. And in that instant, he knew. The hunt had begun. Milo was already inside the ring. Noah tore through the tree line, the sting of diesel and oil already thick in his lungs. Each step sank deep into the damp earth, leaving prints like he was being pulled under by the same invisible mud that had swallowed his life too many times before. The roar of the engines shook the air. Steel jaws of dozers clanged somewhere beyond the ridge, their growls rolling through the fog like thunder without lightning. He called out Milo's name, voice ragged, throat scraped raw. The forest spit it back to him, broken, warped by the wind. The clearing opened sudden. What hit his eyes first wasn't his boy, it was the scarf. A strip of blue lying crooked on wet grass, soaked, smeared with mud. Nearby, the tin box, the same one Milo had held to his chest like armor for weeks, lay bent, lid ripped off, its shell dented where a boot had crushed it. A puff of grey mine dust clung to the damp ground, scattered proof of the secret Lena and Milo had carried like a curse. Noah dropped to one knee, fingers pressing into the scarf. It was still warm, faint as a breath. He pulled it close, chest locked tight, breath hammering against his ribs. He dragged comrades from blast holes, lifted limp bodies out of sand craters. But this hollow in the air where a child had been seconds ago, was a different kind of wound. His blood felt thick, slowing, like it wanted to stop moving. He rose fast, eyes scouring. The ground spoke clearer than words. The gouge of heavy tread slicing across the soil, deep grooves cut by machines built to level stone. Alongside them bootprints, heavy, men's size, trampling across smaller steps. The child's trail ended sudden. It was swallowed, erased under the weight of the larger strides. His phone vibrated sharp in his pocket. He ripped it out, screen glaring against the haze. A strange number lit up. He answered. The voice that bled through was steel in ice water. 24 hours. Bring the USB. Take the boy. Noah's grip crushed the phone tight. Veins rose against his skin. His mouth opened, but words strangled before they made it out. Silence stretched. Then the voice slid back in, slower, like a blade dragged on stone. No cops, no lawyers. Alone. You know the place. The line clicked dead. The screen blinked alive again. A message this time. A string of coordinates. Cold. Final. Warehouse K-12. Outskirts of the abandoned mine. Noah stood locked, phone trembling in his fist, eyes drilling into the digits. K-12. He knew it. He'd heard the name whispered by old miners, half curse, half warning. A storage shed, built years back for spare equipment. After the collapse, the place was abandoned. Roof torn open, walls rotting, carrion birds nesting in the rafters. It wasn't a meeting point. It was a grave. He bent down, clutching the scarf, then lifted the crushed tin. Mine dust clung to his sweat-slick hands, smearing grey. His heartbeat slammed against him, not steady anymore, but like a hammer counting down. In his head, Milo's face flashed, small body curled in the truck cab, eyes wide, waiting for something he didn't know how to name. Eyes that had looked to Noah as if he could hold back the whole world. He'd promised himself, maybe not out loud but deep inside, nobody gets left behind. And yet here he stood, empty hands, the boy ripped out of reach in seconds. He shoved the scarf and box into his coat, eyes gone bloodshot. Despair tightened around his throat like wire. But under it, something harder was forming, iron setting in. He knew this play. Hostage, deadline, kill zone. Classic move from anyone with power who wanted to corner a man into walking straight into the trap. But he also knew despair wasn't an ending. It was the start. The line you crossed before you fought back. He stepped back, eyes lifting to the heavy sky. The fog clung low, smothering the treetops. Beyond it, the engines had gone silent, like they wanted him to notice, like they wanted him to feel the hole left behind, to taste what he'd lost, and to know the clock had started ticking. The memory hit, hard and uninvited. Afghanistan. A boy, no older than Milo, dragged off in front of the unit. Orders had been clear. No intervention. He had stood still, hands knotted at his sides. The next morning, all they'd found was a child's sandal, half buried in ditch water. That ghost had never left him. It had ridden his shoulders home, whispering each night. Now it was here again, but different. This time the order wasn't from some brass above. This time the choice was his. Noah clenched the phone until his knuckles blanched. The coordinates glowed, pulsing like a needle on a compass. The path was laid. If he wanted Milo back, if he wanted to keep the promise he hadn't dared speak, he had to walk into that ruin, into the belly of it. He stared at the numbers until they blurred. He could already feel the ground of K-12 under his boots, the cracked concrete, the rusted beams, the smell of rot. He could see the shadows waiting there. He could hear Rix's voice, not through a phone, but echoing off the walls. The scarf weighed heavy in his pocket. The box rattled when he moved, bent metal scraping his coat. Every detail dug into him, reminders of the boy stolen, reminders of the woman left clutching air. But the anger under it all that was new. It wasn't a fire. It was steel, slow and cold, shaping itself into something he could use. He had 24 hours. 24 hours to step into the wolf's den, carrying the one piece of evidence that could damn them all. 24 hours to decide how much of himself he was willing to burn to pull the boy back out. He turned from the clearing, boots sinking in mud, and started back toward the shed where Lena waited. Each step was heavier than the one before, but each one also steadied him. The hunt had changed. The trap had been set, but Noah Granger wasn't walking blind into it. Not this time. The night draped itself heavy, thick as a burial cloth. The road to K-12 lay silent, flanked by rusted fences and the bitter smell of old mine earth damp, metallic, sour as forgotten blood. Lena drove the pickup, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, her grip so tight it looked as if she meant to snap it off. Beside her on the passenger seat, wrapped in plain cloth, sat the decoy USB. Small enough to fit in a pocket, but it carried the weight of lead. In the mirror, her eyes looked hollowed out, drained of color, split between fear and something harder, a decision that had already burned away her way back. Noah's words replayed in her ears, clipped and final. You go in alone. He wants to see weakness. Let him believe it. I'll be there. He hadn't explained more. No where, no how. Just that. She hadn't asked. Some things didn't need asking anymore. The warehouse loomed like a corpse left too long in the open. Corrugated walls punched with holes, roof sagging under decades of rain. One sickly yellow bulb swung on a cord inside, its flicker pulsing like an animal's eye in the dark. Lena cut the engine, stepped out, her boots crunching gravel sharp in the cold air. She straightened her spine and walked in. Inside, the light bled down from above, jittering shadows across cracked cement. In the middle, waiting as if he'd been carved out of the walls themselves, stood Graham Rix. Long black coat, pale face carved with lines, a smirk tugging one side of his mouth. Beside him, tied and gagged, was Milo. The boy's eyes burned wide, catching the glow, shaking but still hunting for his mother. Lena's heart slammed, a vice tightening around her ribs. She wanted to scream, to tear forward, to rip her boy out of that rope, but she couldn't. Every step had to land right. She reached into her coat, pulled out the cloth bundle, and tossed the decoy USB across the floor. It clattered against the cement. Rix crouched, picked it up, turned it in his hand. His grin widened, eyes hard as winter glass locking on her face. At that same moment, the left side door creaked. Hinges old as rust groaned just enough to whisper. A shadow slipped in, low, quiet, gliding between stacks of rotted crates. Noah. He'd crawled through half the valley, hugging walls and ruins, to reach this entry. Now he moved like smoke, every breath shallow, every eye fixed. He didn't glance at Lena, didn't glance at Rix. His gaze stayed pinned to one thing, the boy. Rix thumbed the USB, then slid it into a phone reader. A light blinked, screen flashing words. His grin faltered. Lines of scrambled code began to crawl, looping endless, alarms chirping. He jabbed fingers across the glass, faster, frustration knotting his brow. The trap was sprung. Ava's handiwork was working its poison. Noah knew this was it. The one window. He lunged from the shadows, pistol out, smooth as if he'd rehearsed the move 1,000 times. His boots hit the floor hard. The noise snapped Rix's head up. Instinct shoved his arm out, yanking Milo tight across his chest, the other hand whipping a pistol into the air. The air froze. Lena gasped, stepping forward, but Noah's stare cut her still. No hand signals, no words. Just a look, don't move. The moment strung tight, thin as wire. Milo thrashed, gag tearing loose just enough to let out a muffled cry. That crack in the silence was enough. Noah dropped low, shoulder slamming into a crate. It toppled, crashing loud, wood and metal clattering. Rix flinched, half a heartbeat. But half a heartbeat was everything. Noah swung, gun barking once, bullets sparking along the rafters. Metal screamed as shrapnel rained. Rix jerked, arms slackening just enough. Lena flew, wrapping her boy, pulling him out, retreating hard toward the corner. Chaos ripped open. Rix bellowed, guns spitting fire. Noah rolled, another shot answering, echo bouncing off every wall. The bulb overhead swung wild, shadows slicing, faces flashing in and out of light. In the frenzy, something slipped from Rix's coat pocket. A flash of silver, skipping across the cement with a hollow ring. Noah's eyes locked. Rix's eyes too. The real USB. Both lunged. Cement scraped. Noah's fingers hit first. He clamped it, curling his fist tight. Rix's face twisted rage, feral, robbed. Gunfire cracked. Lena shielded Milo, pressing him into the wall, her own body the barrier. Noah fired back, driving Rix into the far corner, pinning him under the swinging light. The fight wasn't talk anymore. This was blood. And then another sound ripped the night. Sirens. Long, rising, splitting through the fog. Red and blue light pulsed through the slats of torn tin, flooding the warehouse in color. Sheriff's cars. The county had come. From here the scene kept building, cops storming in. Noah and Rix circling, evidence clutched in a hand slick with sweat. Every word Lena breathed, every cry Milo made, cut into Noah like glass. The fight wasn't over. It was only shifting shape. The sirens hadn't even finished when the tin door tore wide. Red and blue light slashed across the warehouse, splitting shadow like blades. Rix stumbled back into the corner, pistol knocked clean from his hand. His face twisted with fury, eyes blazing hate, even as two county deputies tackled him to the floor. The sound of cuffs locked sharp, metallic, final. Milo clung to his mother's arms, his body shaking but his eyes wide, searing the scene into memory, as if it would never fade. Noah lowered his weapon, chest heaving, gaze fixed. Rix craned his neck up from the concrete, grin curling despite the cuffs cutting his wrists. "You think you've won?" His voice carried, thick with contempt. "The court in this town is my backyard. I walk in, I walk out, cleaner than I came." The words landed like a scar, slicing through the silence. No one answered him. Deputies hauled him upright, boots scraping on cement, chains rattling. The sound was dry as bone. Lena crushed her boy to her chest, tears slipping quiet down her face. She didn't sob. She just held on, every drop a promise she couldn't speak. Noah stepped near, rested a hand on her shoulder, the weight of it steady as stone. He didn't need to say anything. The certainty in his eyes steadied her spine more than words ever could. By dawn, Ava Sinclair moved faster than anyone thought possible. Her tiny office became a war room. The original USB was sealed, packed, and shipped emergency to the state court, skipping over every county hand Rix still owned. At the same time, she released copies to 2 regional papers. Alongside them, she issued a statement short and sharp. "We hold documented proof of safety orders cut at Eagle Ridge Mine, leading to the deaths of dozens. There is no denial strong enough to cover this." The fire spread faster than wind. By noon, the same local papers that had smeared Lena as unstable widow were being torn up in front of cafe windows, shredded into confetti of shame. On the radio, the noon bulletin played the audio file, the voice of Graham Rix ordering support beams swapped, his tone calm, unflinching, merciless. The townsfolk listened in silence, then whispers grew, and those whispers swelled into anger. From his cabin porch, Noah watched the paperboy tack up a new headline in thick black ink. "Eagle Ridge owner faces criminal indictment." But relief didn't come, not to him. He remembered Rix's words, "This court is my backyard." He knew that part was true. Local judges, local juries, they'd been dining off Rix's table for years. The difference now was Ava. She had dragged the fight beyond the fence line, into a court Rix couldn't buy with hunting trips and golf weekends. State level, bigger eyes, harder hands. Late in the day, Ava arrived with a satchel heavy with files. She dropped them on the table, dust puffing off the canvas. Inside was a stamped confirmation from the state court. The evidence was logged, docketed, and in motion. She tapped her laptop next. "We're not finished. He'll stall, throw money into delay after delay, but now he's stripped. Every hour, the public tips further against him. That's pressure even his money can't clean off." Noah listened, but his eyes stayed on Milo. The boy sat at the table, pencil scratching slow, sketching from memory. A tall figure with a miner's helmet, drawn in crooked lines beneath beams of light. His father, or what his mind remembered of him. The lines were shaky, but the intention was sharp. Watching him, Noah felt something in his chest twist. The heaviness he'd carried, the despair, the exhaustion shifted. What replaced it wasn't lighter, but it was sharper, a reminder. Everything he was doing now, every risk, wasn't just for the truth. It was for the boy sitting across from him. That night, the fire in the stove burned low, orange glow licking the cabin walls. Lena leaned quiet against Milo, who had drifted at last into sleep. Noah sat across, cleaning the pistol, eyes never leaving the window, listening to the wind in the trees. Then Ava's phone buzzed. A text, no name, no return number. She opened it, eyes narrowing. She turned the screen toward Noah. A photo filled the frame, a page ripped from a shift logbook. The handwriting was messy, rushed, but legible. Cut supports order from GR. It wasn't just the USB anymore. It was corroboration. A living witness somewhere out there. The missing night foreman, the man whispered lost after the collapse, had left his trail. He was alive. Noah reached across, touched the words on the glass. In that instant, it hit like a blast in his skull, not shrapnel, but conviction. This wasn't just hope. This was proof stacking, piece by piece, heavy enough to crush a man like Rick's. For the first time, Noah let himself believe the truth could break through. Outside, the town sank into dark. But in the little cabin, firelight flickered across their faces. The despair of yesterday had reshaped into something else entirely. Resolve. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were dragging the lie into daylight, no matter what it cost. And somewhere, in some holding cell or polished office, Graham Ricks was hearing the same news. Noah knew it. And he knew one thing for certain. A man like that wouldn't sit still. By the time the morning session opened, the whole town felt crammed into the county courthouse. The hallways sweated people cheap aftershave, thin coffee, old paper, and nerves all mixed into one difficult smell. Noah stood at the back row, spine straight, face calm, but the little tendon in his neck twitched with every heartbeat. Beside him, Lena held Milo close, her hands closing over the boy's shoulders like a thin shield that still somehow held. Up front, Ava sat in the first pew, glasses low, files fanned open in tidy layers, bright tabs like ammunition in a belt. Across the aisle, Graham Ricks came in wearing a dark suit, wrists cuffed, lip tugged into a lazy half-smile that made decent people want to step outside. Whispering rolled across the room, the way wind scrapes the mouth of an abandoned pit. The judge rapped the gavel short, dry, no flourish. The prosecutor started with a clean line, a timeline, step by step. He laid a track from the technical reports to the closed-door meeting, and then straight to the cave-in. Every time he hit a keyword, Ava nodded once, fingers sliding to the exact page like she'd memorized the hymn book. When the prosecutor sat, the room went so quiet you could hear a reporter's pen roll off a desk in the middle row. First witness, a surviving miner, weathered face, eyes sunk back. He told how the night shift settled into the seam, how the little ticks and rips sounds like needles nicking your scalp started up, and then the west pillar shivered. He yelled to pull out. The shift foreman told him to stick to procedure, that no one had authorized stopping the line. Minutes later, the ground slipped out. A sheet of ceiling came down like the lid on a massive coffin. He finished with his jaw locked, eyes dry like his tears were buried with the others. The courtroom held its breath. Lena testified after. Ava didn't leave her standing up there alone long. Lena didn't cry. She didn't turn the story into theater. Her voice stayed, even while she walked through the path of the USB, the rushes through black back roads, the threats slipped under doors, the photo taken through the kitchen glass, the engine that stalked her, the market whispers, the headlines that called her broken. With each sentence, Noah lowered his head a little further, worried if he met her eyes he'd break the one thing keeping them upright. When she reached K-12, a tremor passed through her stare, but she held. She ended with one hard line, "I brought my child out of the dark, not to deliver him to a man who stamps darkness into law." Ricks's attorney shot up, waving photocopies of so-called treatment notes, trying to turn her into a delusional widow. Ava didn't argue much. She raised the sealed USB, let the clerk take it, then cued the screen. The audio rolled. A low, commanding voice, "Ricks. B. Grade supports can hold, save 400 grand this quarter." The temperature in the room dropped like a draft had crept under the floorboards. The defense stammered, pivoted, claimed the audio was spliced. Ava had been waiting for that. She walked the court through the chain of digital custody from a state-certified lab. Signatures in order, matching hash values, independent verification. The prosecutor tapped the wall clock. All of it aligns with the internal meeting time. Then the man everyone had been waiting for, the night shift foreman. He came in hollow, cheeked, beard rough, eyes moving over the exits like a man who'd lived too long in the crosshairs. He said he'd tried to report up. He said he'd been threatened with termination, put under watch, and finally slipped away with the shift book hidden under a floorboard. He opened that book at the rail, his hands shaking so hard the word support seemed to crawl along the line, and still he read it clean. Cut supports order from GR. A ripple went through the gallery, short and sharp, Then a blanket of silence fell again, as if someone had set a boulder on everybody's chest. The defense grabbed the one thread they had. "Did you write that before or after the incident?" He answered without blinking. "Before. Because after, they dragged me off site and it rained. My ink runs in water. This page doesn't." He lifted it to the light. Sure enough, the line was dry, browned with age, a nick on the edge like it had been pinched under a table in a hurry. Ava didn't need to touch it. She just nodded to the prosecutor. The USB and the logbook slid together like two rails meeting flush. Ricks took the stand, didn't plead, didn't rattle. He tilted his mouth and swore he'd been framed. Said all cuts came off engineering recommendations. Said the voice on tape was compiled from other meetings, out of context. He spoke smooth, the kind of practice certainty you only get after years of talking instead of telling the truth. Then the prosecutor played the tail-end clip, the one where his voice ordered, "Burn the records." The room pitched like someone had thrown a stone down a deep well. The whispers drained out. Ricks glanced around, that sleek smile starting to crack, and you could see the glazed chip on a man who'd always won and was tasting his first loss. Sheriff Doyle's name was called next. His color went gray while staff read out the texts with Ricks's aid about managing intake of statements. Ava kept her blade sheathed and let the prosecutor press. Doyle asked to recuse himself from any further role, citing conflict. The gallery gasped, then went still. Noah watched it without satisfaction. He'd seen this before. Systems lean, and people build their lives on the tilt because it's easier that way. By late afternoon, the sky outside the courthouse windows had gone iron dark, but inside the wiring was lit to one door only. Ava rose one final time. She didn't raise her voice. She forced each word in like a nail. A decision to cut the supports was cashed in for money. An order to burn records was cashed in for nameless graves, and a child was kidnapped in exchange for a phone call that said, "Bring the USB. We're not here to sell a morality tale. We brought evidence." The judge called a short recess. When he came back in, his face looked like quarry stone. He read the ruling in blocks short, clean, no speech-making, manslaughter by gross negligence, witness intimidation, destruction of evidence. He referred ancillary names, including the sheriff's office, to state investigators. Each charge fell like a rock from a hand hit, bounced once, and hummed low. When the cuffs clicked, nobody clapped. Some people exhaled, tired, heavy. Lena wrapped her arms around Milo, her forehead sinking into his hair. Her hand loosened for the first time in months. Noah stood behind them, not touching, but his presence took their weight, bone strong. A local reporter, Avery, lifted his camera and then lowered it again. He seemed to understand there are moments when a lens has no business being between the living and what they feel. Deputies turned Ricks toward the holding door. As he passed Noah's row, he leaned just a fraction, bringing his mouth close enough that only Noah could hear. "You forgot discharge. Gate 3. His breath smelled like mint. Polished. Obnoxious. 2 words, "discharge gate," fell into Noah's ear like a stone dropping into a shaft with no bottom. The deputies moved him on. He didn't get to say more. The words stayed behind. Noah didn't move. The map of the mine unrolled in his head. All the nights he'd read through the reports, the side channels inked in pale blue under the footnotes. Level 3. The discharge gate, where slurry and wastewater bled out at the end of the shift. If something down there hadn't been dug up, if something had been hidden where fire couldn't touch it, boxes that don't burn, or uglier things than boxes, then this fight wasn't finished. Rick's whisper wasn't a threat. It was a sneer, half-truth, half-poison, tossed like a steel marble before the cell door shut. Milo tugged Noah's sleeve, the boy's eyes looking up for a cue, a sign that the world was steady again. Noah bent and laid a warm hand on his hair. One simple touch, but it held a promise he'd never say out loud. Lena watched him. The darkness in her gaze had thinned, but a new flicker of worry lit at the edges. She understood what he did. Verdicts don't smooth out the ground. Under the surface, the water still runs. Ava packed her files, breathing slow, steadying her voice. She whispered to Noah next steps to protect the foreman, relocation for Lena and Milo through a state program, legal maneuvers to keep the local bench out of the line of fire. Noah nodded, eyes drifting to the far window where a narrow bar of light cut through, dust floating like ash. He remembered the cave, Inn's thud, the mine stink, the weight of a tin box in a child's arms. Those things sat on his shoulders like a ruck he refused to set down. The corridor emptied in fits and starts. Reporters flooded the steps, recorders chirping. In the yard, a handful of men stood before a rough board carved with the dead miners' names, set under an old oak. They didn't speak. They laid split-edged hard hats at its base, as if returning rank to the fallen. Noah passed and paused half a beat, his eye catching a name scratched with a pocket knife. He hadn't known the man. He felt like he knew them all. The transport rolled out the back gate, lights washing over a ribbon of water on the asphalt. Ricks faced forward in the rear seat, no visible grin, no scowl. Only his parting words had any weight left in that room, and they hung in one man's ear. Noah opened the truck door for Lena and the boy. Ava shook his hand firm, brief, warmer than usual. "We pulled it out of the dark," she said, voice low. "Now we move fast before someone throws a fresh sheet over it." He nodded. No promise made. His eyes were answer enough. Main Street had changed color. Headlines flipped in the racks. People on cafe stoops went quiet as Noah's truck rolled past. A few heads dipped. No applause. None needed. Those nods felt like late apologies mailed out to a wooden cabin by the trees, to a woman once called unstable, to a child once treated like a prop in a lie. Afternoon poured down hard, sunlight flaring off the windshield. Milo slept against his mother's shoulder, breath even. Lena watched him, then turned to the hills beyond town, thin lines of ridge showing under the skin of haze. Noah drove in silence. In that silence he heard it, a slow fall of rock far below the mine, the reminder of a gate no one had unlatched. They turned onto the dirt road back toward the timberline when Noah's phone buzzed. Not an unknown number, an automated ping from the state archival system. Additional image set received from anonymous source, related to level 3 discharge system. He read fast, eyes narrowing. The coordinates traced along the old outflow channel, a notch past the K-12 shed. Something was calling, not in words, in tracks. He killed the screen and looked toward the woods. The wind barely touched the pines, light as a whisper. He tightened his hands on the wheel. The old feeling slid up his spine. The next night would not be quiet. Rix's murmur, "You forgot. Discharge Gate 3 wasn't just a threat." It was a signpost tossed at his feet, half dare, half warning. Whatever it was, he'd go. In the back seat, Milo shifted, hand searching for the new scarf Lena had given him. She pulled a blanket up over him and rested her head against the seat. Noah glanced in the rear view. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Everyone in the truck knew the same thing. This story hadn't shut. Underground, the black water was still waiting for someone to lift the lid. Night came down like a slow curtain by the time they reached the cabin road. The stove took a flame on the second match. Milo stirred, blinked, and let Lena guide him to the bed. Ava called once more, short check-in, logistics, a quiet warning about rumors that some county hands were still loyal to the old line. Noah listened, looking past the window glass to where the trees made a darker stripe against the sky. When he hung up, he laid the map out on the kitchen table, turned on the lamp, and traced the channels with his thumb. Level 3. The feeder pipe. The outfall. He circled the anonymous coordinates, their digits still burned in his brain from the message. He slid the pistol closer, not out of fear, but out of habit. Then he sat back and let the quiet fill the room until he could hear the wood snapping softly in the stove. Lena stepped out from the bedroom, barefoot, tired in a way only mothers get. "He's out," she whispered. Noah nodded. She looked at the table, at the map, the pen marks, the way his hand still hovered like it was ready to punch through the paper and grab whatever lay under it. "You're going?" she asked. No accusation. Just a statement shaped like a question. "Soon," he said. "Alone?" she asked. "For the first look," he said. "After that, we do it the right way." She crossed her arms, took a breath to argue, then let it out. "Don't make me find another scarf," she said, voice thin but steady. "I won't," he said. She knew that was as much of a promise as Noah Granger ever gave. She nodded once, then turned back down the hall. He waited a long minute, then stepped outside. The night had cooled into something cleaner than the courtroom's air had been. He stood with his palms on the porch rail, eyes on the black seam where the trees met the sky. He thought of the foreman's handwriting, the dry page that wouldn't smear. He thought of the audio's dead tone, money counted over lives. He thought of Rix's mint breath puckering the word discharge, and he thought of a boy's small fingers clutching a tin box as if the world were inside it. He went back in, shut the door, and slid the bolt home. He slept in the chair, boots on, the stove's dull glow painting the ceiling like a low sunrise that never climbed. The map lay open under his hand, the circled point waiting. Dawn broke thin. He brewed coffee that tasted like old coin. He packed light, rope, flashlight, battery pack, a short pry bar, the pistol, extra rounds, a folded poncho, and a sandwich Lena forced into his hand as if bread could stop a bullet. He wrote a note. "Back before dusk. If I don't call by noon, go with Ava. Don't wait." He left it under the coffee tin where Lena would find it as soon as she reached for a cup. On the porch he paused. The air smelled like wet iron, the way the whole valley sometimes does when the fog lifts out of the pits. He eased the truck down the track, kept his lights off until he hit the service road that paralleled the old slurry canal. The sun got stronger by inches, but the canal stayed in shadow. He parked 100 yards short of the pin the state archive had pinged. He walked the rest. Gravel gave way to cracked concrete, then to a run of old grating that had rusted into lace. The outflow chute lay ahead, mouth half choked with brush, a metal gate bolted with hardware big as fists. He knelt. Mud told a newer story, footprints, not county-issue boots, lighter tread crossing once in, once out. Someone had beaten him here. Recently, he touched the bolt, cold. He put his ear to the metal. The canal sang a low note, water working through someplace it shouldn't. He slid the pry bar under a corner plate and leaned. The plate groaned, then gave a fraction. On the second pull, it lifted enough for him to get fingers under. He set the bar, breathed, and worked slow. The plate came up, sticky with silt. A smell rolled out, stagnant water and paper rot. He aimed the flashlight into the gap. The beam found a narrow service crawl behind the gate, barely high enough to belly through. 20 feet in, the light hit edges. The edges were square. He lowered himself onto the grating and slid into the crawl space, shoulders rubbing concrete, stomach against wet metal. He moved careful, one push at a time, until he reached the boxes. Plastic, sealed, old labels half-eaten by damp. He wiped one with his sleeve. Black stenciling bled through. ER Safety Archive. He pressed the beam along the seam. Metal clasps, not padlocked. He popped the first. Inside, manila folders in plastic sleeves, each folder stamped with dates that straddled the year of the collapse. He pulled one halfway out. The top sheet was a memo, signatures redacted, but the block letters at the bottom were clean. Dispose after review. A second box held hard drives in anti-static bags. A third Noah's chest, tightened, held disposable phone shells, and a spiral notebook sealed in vacuum plastic. Rix had been right about one thing, the gate. He'd been wrong about the rest. This wasn't an exit. It was a pantry, a place to store the kind of truth that mold and fire can't share. Noah eased a folder into his pack, then one of the drives, then the notebook. He resealed what he could, set the plate back the best his hands could manage, wiped mud with mud until the scene looked like it had before he came. When he crawled back into the morning light, his shirt was black with grime, his elbows raw. He sat on the grating a second, breathing hard, listening for engines, for boots, for anything. Nothing came. The valley was quiet again, the way it gets right before a storm decides whether to break. He stood, shouldered the pack, and looked once more at the gate. Discharge, he said under his breath, tasting the word and the mint that came with it. Then he turned toward the truck. He drove without the radio. When the cabin came into view, sunlight found the window glass and flashed. Inside, he knew, the stove would be warm, the coffee stale, the boy's scarf hung to dry by the door, and the woman's eyes waiting to measure him for damage. He wasn't finished. The court had been one battle, the ground under the mine would be another. But for the first time since a photo had arrived on a porch wet with rain, he felt something beyond anger and duty. He felt momentum, the kind that pulls a story forward, even when men try to nail it to the floor. He parked, killed the engine, and sat with his hands on the wheel until his pulse stopped climbing. Then he picked up the pack and went inside to put the next set of proof on the table. The map was still there, the circle was still there, and the family he'd chosen to stand with was, too. Noah closed the door softly behind him, and somewhere, beyond the courthouse and the cell, a man who'd lived by money and nerve exhaled into clean air and wondered how long a closed gate could hold back a river. A week after the trial, the iron sign at the Eagle Ridge gate wore a new coat of red paint, suspended indefinitely. The local station read it out in the morning news, announcer's voice a little shaky but clear, like the town was finally letting go of a weight it had carried in its chest for years. Folks pulled their trucks over by the gate. A few just stood there with hard hats in their hands, staring into the dark beyond the fence. Nobody cheered. There wasn't champagne like in the movies. What you heard were long, slow breaths, like the stone under the pit had finally exhaled. In town, the coffee shops that used to hum with rumor got quiet. The trashy rags shut up, and the longer pieces showed up about justice, about change. But for Noah, the only headline that mattered wasn't on paper. It lived at the cabin by the trees where, every evening, Lena and Milo still sat on the porch, where the sound of a hammer tapping rose steady and simple, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. They rebuilt the weathered awning together. Lena set the nails. Noah held the frame. Milo stretched up on his toes to pass the short boards. The boy talked less than before, but after he set each slat, he looked at his mother, then at Noah, as if he wanted to be sure the thing would truly hold. On the living room wall, he'd hung a sheet of colored pencil, clumsy lines, clear shapes, a woman next to a child, and on the other side, a soldier in a long coat with a plain hat sketched on top. Above it, 3 shaky words, Mom, me, soldier. Lena looked at the drawing, eyes wet, mouth lifting just a little, like it was the first time she could picture a future with a shape to it. At night, the stove burned hot, copper light working across their faces. Noah didn't say much, he never did, but he left his hand on the table, close to Milo's, and didn't pull it back. Lena said nothing and let the warmth soak in, slow and lasting. The house that had been a stopgap shelter felt like a home now, at least for the moment. Even so, Noah wouldn't allow himself to forget Rix's last whisper in the courtroom. You forgot, discharge gate 3. The words rolled around in his head like loose rock, never landing, never stopping. After Lena and the boy fell asleep, he often stood on the porch, eyes on the path toward the mine. In the wind he could still smell old water sour, mineral, like something was moving down there where no one could see. One fog-soft morning, He shrugged into his coat and left before dawn. The track toward the old level 3 outflow was rough broken brush and tailings and the bones of old fencing. When he reached it, a line of chain link lay crushed, panels thrown aside like a heavy rig had shouldered through. The ground was fresh and wet, marked with the clean bite of oversized truck tires. The edges were still sharp, no rain yet to blur them. He crouched and pressed a glove into the mud. Oil smell, fresh, not old. Someone had been here in the days after Rick's went down. He straightened and looked into the black mouth of the channel. The drip of water came back at him, steady, cold. He stood there a long time, wind combing through his early grey hair. The trial might have closed one chapter, but it hadn't finished the book. Something else was waiting deep underground, where the bracing had been cut, where records might never have burned, where a verdict didn't reach. By the time he drove back, first light slid across the cabin and lit the drawing on the wall. 3 figures, still standing. Nothing had changed on the paper, but in Noah's eye a grey bar seemed to cut the frame in half. The cabin was safe for now. Outside, another gate hadn't been opened. Every tire mark in the dirt felt like an unfinished appointment. Justice had been called by its name, but its echo had only just started. The other secrets were still waiting. The story of Noah, Lena, and Milo reminds you that justice doesn't always come out of a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from refusing to bow to the dark. A soldier used to silence chose to stand up, because there are times when silence is the same as helping the wrong side. Grown folks learn the price of the truth is never cheap, but if nobody pays it, the lie wins every time. The lesson here isn't just saving a family, it's holding the honor line for a whole town. And sometimes real courage is protecting what's decent even when you know the road ahead is still night. When you close this chapter, you don't just see a case tried and a powerful man bending to the law. You see a new porch roof, a kid's drawing on a cabin wall, and 3 people learning how to call one another a family. That's what the soldier found after all those years locked up tight. Not victory, but the simple, stubborn peace of having a place to go back to, a hand to hold, a pair of eyes you can trust. For those of us who've already walked half our miles, maybe that's what's left when the noise fades. And if you've ever stood at that same fork, speak up or stay quiet. I'd like to hear your story. Share it below. Maybe what you carry will be the push someone else needs to make it through their own dark stretch.